So onto the lecture, actual HTTP. So HTTP is how we're going to communicate over the internet. This is not going to be as heavily as a coding session as many of your last ones. Like, we're not just going to learn the functions and everything else. We're going to kind of a little bit more theoretical. What is HTTP? And HTTP is a way of finding resources across the internet. So you can kind of compare it to like the internet being this entirely big library, and this resource is the address of a book, or the address of a, or this URL is the address of a resource within that library. So an entire URL that y'all might be familiar with is something that looks like this. It's a full thing, and it's like, you know, HTTP or HTTPS, and then it gives you the name of the site, and then it says, this is the absolute path. This is where I want you to go and return me this resource. And so what's actually happening here is gendesign.com is the name of a server. It's like a physical server that exists. Let's say it exists in Virginia. And this name of the site resolves to an address. So you type that in, the browser says, okay, this is actually going to Virginia. You go to this person's website in Virginia, and you actually look for this physical resource. And if it's there, it returns that resource back to you. And if it's not there, it's going to return you something like 404 or not found, or this thing isn't there. And so what are the pieces within that? That's when we kind of have this client-server communication, and we're going to look into what these messages look like. So in this scenario, you have a web client, which is a laptop or a desktop or a phone, something with a web browser normally. And that sends a request, and that request travels to a remote resource. In the case in slide 4 right above, that travels to gendesign.com, right? Gendesign.com is the address of a server. Let's see if I can bring that over, that little red thing. Gendesign.com is the address of our server. Your phone, on the other hand, is the client. And so the client sends a message to the server receives that message and says, do I understand this message? Can I do something with it? And if it can do something with it, if it will work with the server, then it returns a response message that says, hey, this is an okay response, or this is the resource you asked for. So that can be confusing, right? Because there's like millions of servers, right? So like, there has to be some shared language, or else how do you know what the request message should look like? And when you get it back, how do you know what the response message should look like? Because these are just, you know, anybody can have it. I could have a server in my home in St. Louis and be talking to someone in New Zealand. And there needs to be some contract that we talk to each other with. And that's this idea of HTTP and kind of like common web patterns. So these are common request types to resources. So there's like a common pattern. If you were to go to a URL, we're going to open this one up here. If we were to go to a URL and we wanted to get all the students from a URL, the common pattern would be to type in /students after the URL. So we have the students here, we have the base URL. If we wanted to get all the students, we would type in /students, and it would return all of them. That's kind of a common pattern. If we wanted to get a single student, we would get it by its ID. And so we would say, okay, get me the students, but actually only get me the student 168. And it would return to you a single student. And this kind of common pattern is what the rest of the internet builds across. This idea of retrieving something, of saying, hey, a resource exists. I don't want to change it. I don't want to update it. I just want it back. That's going to be a GET request. A GET request to a server is always going to just retrieve a resource. There's 3 other types of requests. The most common request besides GET is POST. And I think that's the only one that was included in y'all's reading. A POST request is going to create something. So a get retrieves and a post creates. The other two types of requests that aren't mentioned to your readings but are still used in the internet is the idea of deleting. So I want to delete a resource, and the idea of updating. I want to update a resource. So what's actually happening when I want to get all, like when I open up this right here and I want to get all the students. So Rocky Fortress, I don't know if y'all can even see this URL up here. Rocky Fortress 42375 for Roku app, and I'll post that in the chat. That's just an API that I stood up for this class, right? And if you want to get all the students from this, if you want to get the student resource, you can type in /student, and it's going to say, hey, I know what /student it is. I'm going to return you this list of resources from /student. And if you want to get a single student, let's say you want to get Kyle James, whose favorite animal is an owl, you can say, well, just give me student 101. And this kind of common language using GET requests is how we're going to communicate with servers all over the world. So in that case, the client was, let me go here. Oops. So in that case, the client is my local computer, the one that I'm screen sharing on. The server, the one that I'm actually talking to, this one lives in Virginia. That's kind of where I got the example from originally. It's hosted through a site and it's running in Virginia. And so what's happening is my laptop types Rocky Fortress /student/101 in the browser. That sends a request message to the server. And then the server says, do I have anything for that student? And if it does, then it returns the response. And that response is what's displayed on the page here. If there's any questions about, feel free to speak up. Otherwise, we're going to work through a few examples by just looking at some right now. All right. So this is an API. API is kind of what's normally referred to as something that's in front of a server. So if our server here contains our resources and that's where we send our requests to, an API is something that'll retrieve stuff from the server for you. And so we'll go here to, we'll go to the API, we'll go to Spotify, and similar to what we did before, these are GET requests where we can retrieve information. So we can say, you know what, I want to send a search request, which is a GET. Now GET, remember, is that going to be creating a resource or returning a resource? A GET request will always return a resource. Yeah, I see a bunch of people in the chat typing it in now. Yeah, a GET request will always be returning a resource. So here, we're not going to worry. We're not going to create new artists in Spotify. We're just going to look for some. So we're going to try this out. And we're going to get the search. We're going to literally search. We're going to search for Otis Redding. And that Otis Redding is an artist. Oops. And so we sent this search request to Spotify's API. The developers at Spotify are sitting, like they have probably 500 servers sitting downstairs in one of their rooms, right? And then, so we actually sent this search request from my browser to one of their servers. They looked up Otis Redding query, type artist, and they were said, yeah, we have that. Like, this is what we have. We have Otis Redding. The genres Otis Redding belongs to is classic soul, funk, Memphis soul, soul blues, right? Here's some images. We looked these up. They said, hey, here's, if you want more images on Otis Redding, here they are. There we go. And so the idea that the internet is organized into these ways using GET and POST requests makes it super simple to actually retrieve information and create new things. You know, like, it would be so freaking confusing if everybody implemented their own standard And you had to be like, okay, but to this person, I send a get request, and to this person, I send a please request, and to this person, I send a different request. The fact that the internet is organized into get requests, post requests, put, and deletes makes this very, very simple to communicate with APIs that we've never even looked at before. If we look at, I wonder if this guy's got an ID. Yeah. He has an ID. So we could probably use this same ID. This is the artist/ID, right? So we could say, hey, this is Otis Redding's ID. And it's going to return Otis Redding back to us in the same pattern, right? We want to get an artist. If we wanted to get all artists, we would just do /artists. If we want to get one by an ID, we'd add an ID. That's the exact same thing we did up here when we said, okay, I want to get all students. Oh, now I want to get just one student. I just want to retrieve one get request. And that's pretty much the basics of HTTP. It's the idea of using get and post requests to communicate to and from resources. Now, we mostly just looked at get requests, right? We didn't actually create something in Spotify. When we looked at this Rocky Fortress site, which had us have students, these are things that are already living on a server somewhere. They already exist. They're just being returned to us. These were all get requests. If you want to have a post request, usually that means you want to have a form, because a form on a website allows a user to enter information. And so if you're developing a user sign up, what that form would probably look like, or if you were implementing a student sign up, what that form would probably look like would be, you have a landing page with a form, someone enters in all their information, and then information is sent to a server, a new student is created, and then they can log in from then on. And that's going to be what we build in these next 15, 20 minutes. We're going to build that form together. So we're going to go from get requests. Now we're going to move into post requests. Forms, when I talked about like standardization, like it's good to have, get and post so that not everybody communicates in a different way. Forms are another way that entering user information is like standardized across the entire internet. So let's do it. This is what the end goal of what we're going to build is probably going to look like. It's going to look something like this. We're going to have a single form. That form will have an opportunity for the user to input a first name. So I'll just do Will, Farrell, favorite food. I haven't had ice cream in a while. And a favorite animal, I'm going to say my dog. And we want to be able to build a form that creates a single student, submits it to an API, and then that student actually appears in our new list of servers. So we're going to be talking to this server that's running in order to actually send our form data there and actually create something. So what I don't know and what I'd like kind of like feedback from y'all on is how familiar are you with like running things like Git from the terminal and running programs in the terminal versus inside of a REPL? Because I have the same assignment on both of those like forums. So if you've done both and you've used Git a few times, I appreciate y'all giving that feedback, then I'll probably do it with GitHub. So I'll go through my example using Git. But if you're not comfortable with Git and you want to really make sure you get forms down, you can have this REPL link. So what I'm going to do, send this over chat. And then send over those links too. So I'll go through kind of, if I was to solve this problem, what I would do using Git. So whenever I use Git, this is just kind of a helpful tip while a few people are going to navigate to the site. I kind of like everything. So this is like my root directory. Make this bigger. If you ever can't see anything, just type in the word enhance in that group chat and I'll make it bigger. Because this is always a whole new world when we're doing this online stuff. So this is just like a tip with Git. I like to store all of my stuff in like a dev folder. So it can be kind of annoying if you're in this root of this project or you're in your desktop to have a bunch of folders and code kind of clogging everything up. So I like to store everything in a dev folder. I'm going to be here in the dev folder, which I'm going to make a little bigger. And I am going to remove my project and start from scratch, just like y'all. So the first thing I do is I'm going to travel to GitHub. And so here is the project that we're going to start with in GitHub. I'm going to read the README. It says, okay, starter code for teaching fundamentals, used as blah, blah, blah. Cloning the repository. That's what I want to do, right? So it gives you 2 instructions to clone the repository. So I'm going to paste the first one. And it's going to clone it. It's going to bring it down. So now if I ls, it's going to be there now. And so I'm going to show one more time. So if I ls right here, it doesn't exist. So let me clear. It doesn't exist. And then I'm going to clone it down. And it's there. And then the next command is to cd into it, to change directory into it. So right now I know I'm in this directory. I can verify that by a command such as pwd to show the current directory I'm in. I can make sure I'm in a Git repository by saying something like git status. And it says, okay, here's the branch I'm in. If I want to see the last commit, git log. I can see the last few commits that were in there, such as updating the README and an even 10. So I'm going to be inside this repository, and we're going to start working on it. The first thing I'm going to do is open it up in VS Code. I have a shortcut on my machine. Some of y'all might not. So I'm just going to do code, and then I'm going to type in this single dot, which did not open it up, but that's okay. Huh. I guess I'm going to go the old school way and open it up like this. Oh, I know what's going on, I think. There we go. I had it on my computer, and then I deleted it to show y'all. And so my VS Code was confused at the memory of which one it was. So I had to close VS Code in order to open it up again. When you do git log, it won't let me do any other commands. So if you do git log -2, oops, you have to make sure you're in the repository. So you verify you're in LC101 HTTP forms. And then git log kind of like -2 almost. That'll show you the last X commits. If you wanted to do the last 20 commits, git log 20. And these are all the changes that I've made to the project since I started it Tuesday, October 1st, 2019. You just have to hit return until you get out of it. If you open up VS Code, you'll see an index.html, you'll see an assets, which contains a CSS file and an application.js file. The only file that we're going to touch is this index.html file. That's going to be the actual bones of the page, the structure of the page. As y'all know, as y'all have probably gone over, the CSS file is what's going to style the page, and the JavaScript file is what's going to make it dynamic. So we're going to do these 10 things. It'll probably take us about 15 minutes. We'll do the first 4.5 together, and then we'll do the last 5 through 10 on your own. Feel free to work ahead if you want. So the first one is, wait, hold up a second. How do we check our work, right? Like, how do we actually see this? Because it'd be pretty annoying to try to make all these changes without actually being able to see what we're doing. Does anybody know, like, how would we like actually look at this HTML page? Yeah, we can open it in a browser. So you can do that, you know, Google Chrome, you can say, I want to open this. Most, if you're in like a Mac or Linux computer, we can just do open index.html. And it's going to say, hey, here is the resource I'm loading. Users, Will Ferrell, dev, LC101, index.html. So is that what's on our screen right now? Let me minimize this over here. Yeah, we got a label for first name, and we have first name. Let's verify that we changed something. Save it, reload the page, changed it. Okay, so now we have like a very quick feedback loop. That's a real key in programming. You don't want to make a bunch of changes before you test something. You want to be able to change it, test it, change it, test it, change it, test it. And it sounds like someone said there's a really good plugin in Visual Studio that will do that live reload for you. That'd be something that'd be pretty cool to look into also. So we're going to go back to first name. And we're going to start adding stuff to a form. A form, all the standard forms on the web, you're going to have this outer tag form, and you're going to give the form an ID. And then inside the form, you're going to have inputs. That's really all you need to have a form. All you need to have is an outer form and inputs. Some of the rest of the stuff we're going to put out there is going to be very valuable to know. It's like very stylistically what you would do, but basic, all you need, form, input. To make this input complete, what this is saying, what this label is saying, hey, I'm a label for the ID first name. And the input is saying, I have an ID first name. And that's what's actually grouping these two together. There's some HTML browser magic going on around the screen that's saying, you know what, these two belong together. They're going to be grouped together. If I want my data to mean anything, to be sent anywhere, all of my inputs have to have an ID. They also have to have one other attribute. Does anybody know what it is? So it's not type. Name. Al got it right. Type is good. Like the more information you can provide is good. But name is all we really need. And what that means is when we actually send the data, like I want to send this data to our URL server. And when I actually send this data, this name is what it's going to be attached to. So that was number 2. We added the name attribute for first name. Number 3 is let's add a field for the last name. And so if I was going to add a field for the last name, I would say, okay, I want to add another field. So my input, I'm going to make that ID last name. And I'm going to send it through to the server also as last name. Save it, refresh, and I got first name and last name. First name is this box, last name is this box. If I was to inspect it and actually look at it, this is probably too, oh, here you can see it. If I was to inspect it and look at it, last name is the second box, first name is the first box. However, this would be a really annoying thing to a user because they have no idea what's going on. So for everything that we have a field, to make it better for the user and accessibility, we are going to add a last name label along with the first name. So now we have a form that has a first name and a last name. Sweet, our form's like 50% complete. Okay, what else does a form need if it wants to submit? This is good. This will, you know, someone can enter all the information you want, but it's not going to actually go anywhere. It's not going to go to another server. And we want to go Where is it? We want to go to this server. We want to go to, Rocky Fortress 4342375. We want to go to that server and create this information. And so in order to submit this, in order to send this data, we need to add a submit button. I see a bunch of people popping in already. Oops. We can just have a button there. I'm not sure if it has to be self-closing or not. Where's my, there we go. There it is. Look at that beautiful button. Another way to do the same thing is to have an input of type submit. And that's going to just give you a full submit button there. That's kind of like personal preference. I don't know if there's one way or the other. I see probably more of them that, have an input type submit than a button, because kind of when the screen readers are going through the screen, if it's input type submit, it's more likely to kind of directly or correctly say this is part of the form than if it's just a button. So now this is sweet. If I submit this, it's trying to send it somewhere. You see this URL change up here. I said William Farrell. I submit it, and it's saying, hey, I'm trying to send it somewhere. I'm trying to do something, but it doesn't know where it wants to send it to. And if I go even to my network tabs, and I say, hey, I sent it, it's like, I'm trying to send it. I'm sending it to this place. So what can I do with it, right? And that's where we need a target. Or in this case, action, which is going to be a post request, because we're going to, oops, hold up. We didn't follow the instructions, did we? We got ahead of ourselves, which is something you always do when you're programming in your day-to-day life too. We added a button, which is good, but we've done a lot of changes. So we need to make an add and commit, right? Okay, so get time. If we want to make a change to our project, the first thing we need to do is make sure we're not on the master branch, right? We shouldn't really be working on the master branch. We shouldn't be making changes on the master branch. We shouldn't push directly from master. We want to make our own branch. So we're going to say check out a new branch. And this branch is going to be finish form. Not a very descriptive branch, but that's what we're going to be intending to do is complete the form. So we're on a branch now, and now if we actually want to add and commit this, we're going to say, okay, what changes did I make to the index.html? I'm going to add those, and then I'm going to add a commit message. That commit message is going to say add last name input to form, and I'm going to add another message that is add submit input for form. I'm going to end my commit message. So now this is my last commit on this form. And if you have your own commit and you do git log 2, the very last commit that we just did is the last commit in its history. And the commit before that was the commit that we all started from. So if you do git log 2, you should see this as your last. You should see your own commit as your last commit and my commit as the one 2 ones ago. On to number 5, right? Add a method and an action to the form tag. So we're going to come up here, and we want this to create a student. So we are going to make it a post. Remember, post is when we create something. Now, our action is going to be the URL that we actually want to send it to. We want to actually send this out to a server somewhere. And this URL, Rocky Fortress, is the URL that we want to send it to. We want to say, hey, create me a student. Send a post request with the following information to the student. Oops, let me get wrapping. There we go. So I'm going to load it, and then we'll kind of go through it to make sure we got it. So it looks the same, right? Nothing's there has changed, but we can inspect it to see, hey, hey, is that there? Yep, method post is there. The action is there. So let's see what we got. Let's actually send something, right? So my name, instead of William, to make it easier to figure out where it's going to be, it'll be Bill, and then coffee. We're going to submit this. And so now the form no longer looks like that. We actually said, hey, go here and submit it. And we look through here, and we do see student 101, Bill, coffee. Favorite food, nothing. Favorite animal, nothing. We don't have those. Those aren't being submitted yet. We just have Bill and coffee. And I see a few people out there are posting theirs too, and nothing's coming through, right? We have people submitting, but no first names coming through and no last names coming through. I wonder why that is. I wonder if we can start figuring that out. We did get a sushi sashimi through. I wonder why these other ones aren't coming through. Let's test it out. What if our name was different, right? What if we said, hey, let's go back to my form. And let's say instead of calling this name, let's test it out, right? What if we said this is actually F name, and this is actually L name, and everything else was the same, right? Labels, inputs, it's going to look the exact same. We refresh as many times as we want, it's going to look the exact same. But now we're going to say Roger, Roger. We're going to submit that and see if it actually shows up. And we come here, and it didn't. We're the last ones to submit, 177, and nothing's on the screen. And so we realize there how the data is sent through actually is with these names. We can verify that again. We can come back here and we say, let's submit Roger, Roger again. We look at the request in the actual browser. And we scroll all the way to the bottom of this request, which has a bunch of other stuff going on. Response headers, request headers. And it says, this is the form data you sent. You sent F name and you sent L name. And those form data, the stuff that we're actually sending to another resource, they come from our names. So if we go back to first name and last name, come back here. Oops, I better refresh the page. Roger, Roger. And we look down at this thing now. It says, oh, yep, there's our first name. There's our last name. And because we labeled them correctly, we come back over to this API, and somewhere here, ooh, where? There it is. 184, Roger, Roger. Whoever's it's out there, congratulations, it's, or Mr. or Mrs. Working. I'm glad I was able to work for you. So let's do ourselves, right? That gives us a good basis. And for everybody else, let's do this ourselves. Let's add another field for favorite animal, add another field for favorite food, add and commit, and then see if you can get your name to actually appear on this web page. If you get done early, or if you're kind of ahead of everybody, here's two other stretches. Make it so somebody can't submit the form unless they are added. So make those forms required. And then make your form look a little better. Divide it into smaller segments that might help with a screen reader. So I'm going to stop presenting for about 5 minutes. Actually, no, I'm going to keep presenting, but I'll give you 5 minutes to work on that. I'm going to leave this up if people need to work off the beginning example. So 5 minutes, 6:15. I'll see you all in a bit. If you have questions, feel free to ask them, obviously. How do you get, good question. Let me see if REPL can work. Oops. Try and send that to everybody. There's that. I'm going to take this exact same thing. If for some reason you want to catch up to this and you're not able to work locally, here is going to be the REPL to everyone. This REPL will also catch you back up. And if you want to actually see the page yourself, I think you can pop this thing out and make changes there in your own. Yeah, if you want to load it, that's a good question. If you want to load it yourself, this little open a new tab, check that out and see if it works. Try it. See a hello world. What is Canis familiaris? Is that dog? Yeah, it is. We'll give you 2 more minutes and then we'll kind of work through some of these together. And don't feel bad if you're not quite done all the way, right? Not everybody's going to finish at the same time. This is something you can continue to do during studio or after class. So I see some people are getting favorite food or first name, last name, and then we have to add favorite food and favorite animal. First name dog, last name animal. All right, let me see up over here. I'm gonna go back in my history and see if I got something. So we got 65 people who have entered something in the form, which is pretty good. A bunch of people probably entered multiple things, which is fine because you're testing stuff out, right? So let's pop back here and we'll work through the rest of these together. Number 6 and 7 say to add a field for your favorite animal and add a field for your favorite food. So I'm going to kind of get rid of a few of these tabs so it's a little more clear where I'm clicking around. And this is my form that I'm writing right here, right? So I'm going to add a new field for favorite food and favorite animal. Now, for me, those are like just slightly different than first name, last name. So what I'm actually going to do is create a whole new field set. And this is not something that you had to do, right? You can group your inputs however you want. But I'm going to use the field set thing to logically group inputs in things that I think will be together. Ideally, I wouldn't be making this decision as a developer. You'd be able to like ask somebody, like one of your actual users, of how those are actually grouped together, or somebody from the business. So this label, first we're going to do a label, and that's going to be for favorite animal. We're going to put it there. We should see that on the screen. And it's in a separate box now because it's in a separate field set. If we wanted to have this in the same field set, oops, it would show up in that same box. But we're going to have it in that field set. And we're going to add an input to go along with it. If I can click on the right thing. And the input is going to be favorite animal. And we want to actually send that through to the server as favorite animal. So when it travels to our backend, Rocky Fortress, it knows, okay, whatever we type in there is favorite animal. And we want to add in favorite food. Now we have a full form. We have first name, last name, favorite animal, and favorite food. Before we submit it, let's add and commit again, right? We made a lot of changes. Let's add and commit. Up to 84 people, by the way, submitted. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to say, okay, what did I change? Get status, right? I changed the index.html. So I'm going to say, I want to add index.html. And then what did I actually do to it? I'm going to commit, and I'm going to provide a commit message. And that's going to say add favorite food and favorite animal to form. Make this a little smaller. Favorite food and favorite animal to form. End quote. So now that's there on the branch. If I was to do git log 3 again, we see the last two commits that we did, and then we see our master commit. Let's actually test it. Is anybody been able to get them all? Let me see if I go back here. Anybody been able to get them all? Yeah, quite a few people. Denarius, who ate horse? I can't remember that series well enough. So I'm going to do, I need a new first name and last name because William Farrell's already in there. Oh, interesting, Mitch. That's good to know. I'm going to do Mitch Johnston because he's the last one who talked in chat. So he might be also on there again, but we're going to make it different because his favorite animal is going to be a Bayou Bengal and his favorite food is going to be gumbo. And we submit these and, ooh, it's a mess. A whole bunch of stuff, right? Is he somewhere on here? And there he is, student ID 243. And if we wanted just Mitch, if we wanted to get just Mitch, we just created him, we just posted him. If we wanted to get him, we would say, okay, only give me student with the ID of 243. And there is Mitch Johnston, favorite food gumbo, favorite animal, the Bayou Bengal. He must be an LSU Tiger fan. That's where the Bayou Bengals are. So then we'll just work through these two stretches quick. I think if we want to make something required, so I guess I should be like, okay, let's say I'm a first-year web developer and something like required form, I don't immediately know that on the top of my head, or I didn't just read about it in the last week. I would go to Google, right? I would say, okay, how to add a required field in HTML. And I would look through some of these things. And they all look kind of similar. So then I would say, okay, let's click on the first link. And I would read through it and I would say, okay, here's our form. We know this is what a form looks like. It's got a label, it's got an input. It looks like we can just add the word required. And that'll make a field required. So let's do that. After name, we can just literally type in the word required. And we're going to add it to both favorite animal and favorite food. So now we come back to our form. Oops. Where is our form? There we go. Come back to our form and we say, we still want to go with Mitch Johnston. But he has a favorite animal, and that is a crab. And he just wants to submit it. And the browser will actually stop you. So if we go back to our picture here, by saying the form required, it's not going to send this request. It won't go. It won't even travel to the server. It's going to stay on your browser. Everything is going to stay on the client until you meet all the requirements. And then once you meet the requirements, then it's going to send it to the server and say, okay, here you go. Server, take it. So that's a nice way to avoid sending a call. Like, let's say you're talking to a server in India. You don't want to send a call all the way across the world if you're just going to be missing an attribute anyways. So you can add these required attributes. And then his favorite food also happens to be a crab, so he adds that. And then it's going to be in here somewhere down here. Yep, student ID 261. Mitch Johnston, favorite food crab, favorite animal crab. And is that the last one? Divide the form into two smaller field set groups. I like using this field set. I don't know if y'all, I don't think it was in your reading. I kind of like that in the most recent HTML standard. I saw something in your reading that said you could use div. I would strongly encourage you to not use div whenever possible, because as a screen reader is going through this, they know what a field set is. It's a group of fields under a form. If it's a div, the screen reader doesn't really know like what the div is supposed to be. It could be holding a button, or it could be holding a picture. A div is just literally a container. And so it's not very descriptive. And so in your HTML, whether it's a form or a different page, if you use descriptive terms like field set instead of div, that's going to be overall better. Yes, unless the server decides. Yeah, so that was a good question, Dominique. Dominique asked, the action here, is it going to send us there after we submit the form? So that's going to depend, as Tom pointed out, on what the server's doing. So the client is going to say, hey, I want to create this information. I want to send it. And so it sends this request message. The server gets that request message and says, got it. Good. I'm going to tell you to go to a certain place. And that response message is like, you know what? Go to this place. So if we actually look at what those requests look like, and J, favorite animal action checklist attribute. And we send this request, we can see these things pop up in our network tab. So we sent it a post request to the URL, and we sent all these headers, right? We said, hey, you're a post request, go here. The server's name is Cowboy somehow. And I'm going to send you form data, and I'm going to send it to this host. So these are all the information that we sent along with the form now. Now, what it did back to us is it said, hey, I'm going to 301. I'm going to redirect you to a new URL, to this URL instead. And that's what it actually sent back to us. This is the same data that's appearing on the screen. The server said, you know what? Now that you created something, I'm going to send you back to this. If you created like a user sign up, you might say, I'm going to send you to a login page so the user can log in for the first time. That'd be like a useful thing. last question, or I guess just a question. How do you put first name and last name on different lines, but still in the same field set? So are you referring to like, so on my screen, there's one on line 20 and one on line 21 and 22. Is that what you mean, Hannah? So you definitely don't need break. There are some elements that will do the break for you. You really shouldn't have to use break. So these are not, and you want it to be, right? Yeah, you could use CSS and say, I want to stack these. You could, if you just wanted them all there and you didn't really want to group them, field set is grouping them, right? You could come back here and say, you know what, just, oops, that's actually going to do it that way. Yeah, you would use CSS to what Jessica said. And you would say, right here where I'm saying, okay, flex these and center them, you would say, reverse them instead of horizontal, vertical. And if you don't know how to do that off the top of your head, you would just Google, right? You would say, how to stack form elements vertically, CSS. And there we go. There's 2 answers here that could help you on the journey. That's my way of saying I don't know it off the top of my head, Hannah. So I would just have to Google it myself. Okay. Is Nick on the line? Let me look. Because that's going to be the end of our lecture.